Okay, good evening. Welcome to the latest version of Building the Scottish State with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught. And I have the great pleasure to have again with me Kenny MacAskill, MP for Alba. First of all, thanks for being with us, as always. It's always a pleasure.
Good to be back. Thanks for inviting me again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's see. So we've got a lot of stuff that we want to get to, but I first wanted to posit to you this idea that, and I've been working with the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group. Paul, if you couldn't put that up on the thing, ScottishSovereigntyResearchGroup.org. And we've got some pretty good, pretty high wattage people to, who we're working with. And we came up with the idea that you have there's been so much of a focus on the Scotland Act and Section 30 and and becoming independent through a referendum, but the Treaty of Union of 1707 is what constitutes what constituted the UK. And our idea was if you hold the idea that in the Westminster Parliament the Scottish MPs represent the Scottish part of a party to the treaty, and of course, you have that they could vote collectively to withdraw from the Treaty of Union. Is that plausible? Do you see that as something that could happen? And what are your views on that?
Well, my take is these things are about political power and political legitimacy. I think the direction of travel has to be towards calling a Scottish Constitutional Convention. I think at the present moment, if all the nationalists and independent supporting MPs withdrew from Parliament, I think the difficulty is if you went to the Chief Constable and said, we want you to do this, he would say, I don't accept instructions from you, I accept them from the Scottish Government or from the Home Secretary. If we went to a health board, they would say, well, we don't know who you are, this is where your instructions. I think what you have to do is to recognise is about political power and political legitimacy. I think a constitutional convention should have been called by Nicola Sturgeon after 2019 when Johnson was elected to rally Scotland, not just those within the SNP. That was passed. So I think what we have to do is to do what Alba is suggesting, which is that those who stand for election for council in the coming May election should be seeking to use it as a basis for a constitutional convention. That convention shouldn't just be MPs, it should be MSPs, and it should be local authority elected members. I think if you got that, then you begin to get the prelude of what happened in Ireland after 1919 and the elections in November 1918, when the Sinn Féin established the Dáil Éireann, and you began to have a parallel state. I think at the present moment, if you tried to establish a parallel state through 45 SNP MPs, 2 Alba MPs, and wee Margaret Ferrier, I think you might find that we would be whistling in the dark. I think you've got to lay the groundwork. So I think there's a way that you get to where I think people want to. But ultimately, it's not about courts. It's about political power and political legitimacy. But I think if you get a Scottish Constitutional Convention, if you get the democratically elected representatives of Scotland, and if unionists choose not to come, that's fine. The rest of us can get on with the day job. But I think if we have a Constitutional Convention after May next year, not just MPs, the MSPs and local authority elections, then I think that's a different situation.
Okay, because also in our group, we've reached out to the EFTA, and we were at the basis of the resolution that was passed with a claim over EFTA. And basically, when in my discussions with the representative from the Secretariat, as long as the Scottish government has the authority to negotiate international treaties and the powers to abide by them, it's an open door. I mean, they basically said that to me and to our group, and I don't think that they necessarily need to. And I'm talking about international recognition here, which obviously is important. I don't think they have a particularly high bar on that. I mean, everybody can see the situation with the UK. The UK has never been weaker. The UK government has never been more despised and ridiculed, than especially after this stuff with the French submarines and Australia and all that. And I'm just, wondering what your view is on just what have you got to lose? Just go for it, reach out to other governments, and I think, you'll find a lot of sympathy there for Scotland in this context. How do you see it?
Well, I agree with you. I think that should be getting done. I think all credit to you and others who have been doing it. I think the Scottish Government should be doing it because I think the world has changed since 2014.
I agree.
We tried doing that in 2014. We did do the rounds. People were going to Germany and elsewhere. And to be fair, I had discussions privately with Norwegians, with the Irish, and they would all say, we wish you well, pal, on you go, but we're not saying anything publicly. But I think you're right. Britain is reviled. International diplomacy, I don't think you're going to get a repetition of, show my age here, of President de Gaulle and, Vive le Québec Libre moment. That is not going to be replicated. But you're certainly going to get a friendlier hearing. You're going to have organisations saying this is how it can be done, as opposed to saying we're not prepared to speak to you. And as I say, I think all of that should be getting done by the Scottish Government at the present moment, because I think the days of President Obama being prevailed upon by Cameron to tweet out Barroso's shameful behaviour in the European Commission, that's all gone. I don't expect the international community to rally to us, exactly the same as Palestine and Catalonia are left to fight their battle. Equally, I think what is going to change, what can change, is they won't do us down.
Yeah, I agree. And but I just wanted to, kind of lay out that scenario, because I think it is plausible, and we're doing work in our group, and we're going to be we've already reached out to Iceland and Norway, and they're sympathetic, and we're going to continue that, to just as our capacity as a research group, to say, well, what do you think in terms of recognition? We're putting to them, if the Scottish MPs were to vote to withdraw, would you consider that a valid democratic act that could constitute independence or decolonization, or however you want to see it? There was an excellent interview with a Barhead Boy the other day with Alf Baird, who excellent interview, and he was talking about the way that Scots need to think about independence, and he very convincingly argued about the possibility, just the way that we talk about it, the way we think about it, as not, well, it is independence, but also decolonization. And the idea that, Scotland had, you talk to some people, oh, well, the Treaty of Union was a voluntary thing, and so of course Scotland isn't a colony. But my father, who was born there, he left because he was capable, and he was able to. He went to Oxford, and because there wasn't the opportunities in Scotland, and that was because there was such a brain drain of Scots, throughout the years. And, not only brain drain, but oil drain, and, whiskey revenue drain, and all these other things. How do you see that? I mean, in terms of Scotland's status within the UK, do you see it as a colony, or do you see it, how do you see it?
I think it's complicated. I mean, I think when people think of colonies, they think of, Kenya and all these things. I mean, I think, first of all, going back to the Treaty of Union, it wasn't, it was a historical equivalent of a shotgun wedding. They basically said, sign up or we're invading. The army was geared, they were crippling our economy. And I think the likelihood is, had Scotland not signed the Treaty of Union, and I don't support, I support those who oppose signing it, but the likelihood is we'd have faced an invasion at some stage, or they would have, stimulated some rising by the powers that be that wanted a union. So I think, that was why it came about. Even then, they had to bribe, cajole, and face the wrath of the people who didn't want it. But that's the backdrop. I think Scotland is being, slowly but surely assimilated in. Its institutions are being undermined. All of these things that Alf says, I think it's how we express it, and that's why we've got to put it. I think if we went out on, and I'm looking out onto Dunbar High Street, if I went out and said there, people would say, "Oh, it's not a colony," because they think of, they think of India, they think of Malaya, they think of things like that. Equally, it's a different power thing. We are, not. It's not a union of equals. This was a takeover. It was, probably, we didn't have the repression that Ireland faced of 800 years of having to fight for its freedom. We got some benefit out of it because we got access to the trade, and Scotland did, get the benefits of the British Empire.
And in the shipbuilding and in the industry, and yes, so
the argument of trickle down economics or whatever else, and we have to take our share of blame because we did participate in the slave trade and things like that. Equally, we were repressed. So I think it's about taking there. It's how you express it, and that's why I think we just have to pick the terminology. I see somebody looking for, how will a convention lead to independence? The short answer, it doesn't. But I think a convention is the prelude to being able to move forward to independence. As opposed to simply saying, please, sir, we would need a referendum. If they say no to a referendum, which they are saying, I think that's where you need to gather the democratic elected representatives of Scotland together to say, they say no, we say the situation as we face is untenable, and then you have to take it from there. What the outcome of that constitutional convention will be, I don't know, but I think it can, and I believe should be, the springboard to saying the current situation is unacceptable. If they will not give us a referendum, then we'll proceed in other different ways. So that's why we have to be fighting on all fronts. We have to be doing the diplomatic engagement that you're doing. We have to be doing the marching that others have been participating in and build that up. And equally, we have to bring together the political powers, and the political powers are to bring together the democratically elected representatives. Douglas Ross chooses not to come, fine and dandy. The rest of us get on with it, because after all, when the Doyle era met, the Unionists didn't attend, but those who had an electoral mandate did go and took it from there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And so we've gotten a few questions. One of which I saw was a soft no, but I think there's a great desire to that people can be convinced. And what I saw in the 2014 referendum, I started writing for Newsnet Scotland in 2012, 2 years before the referendum, and I stopped after. But my first article was about, you've got a blank slate. You can create a new constitution, and write it, put it out there, and let that be the basis of the vote. Let them say, okay, well, either we can vote for this in this constitution, or we can vote to remain in the UK. But the things are clear. And I remember you saying last time when we spoke last that the Scottish government has not done this planning. And so how do you see planning for things like currency, and because we have Jim Rideout, for example, who's participating with our group, who's a very big specialist, and it just seems to me as if the Scottish government has not done the planning, and a lot of people would be convinced, if they knew what they were voting for in terms of. How much planning should be done, and what's the balance? Because, for example, in 2014 they were like, oh well, we can't say that we want a republic because that would annoy the people, the royalists who want to keep the monarchy, this type of thing. How do you see all that in terms of how much planning should be done and made public before a referendum or some kind of confirmatory vote in whatever form?
Well, I think you need to, what we need to do is stimulate the movement. And I think my concern at the moment is not only that the Scottish government has not been doing any planning, coronavirus aside, and I accept the difficulties, but there just hasn't been even any momentum given to the Yes movement. It's been a dead hand has been put upon the Yes movement by the SNP, which is why we have the formulation of Alba. I see there was a question that came in asking about, well, what Alba is going to do if we're not registering in the polls at the moment. Well, everybody has to start somewhere. That's why, as I was saying earlier, as the SNP did next week, sticking out leaflets, is exactly the same as I built up the Edinburgh SNP after we were wiped out in 2003. We start somewhere, because it's not coming out through the Scottish government, and it's not coming about through the SNP. So more power to those who were out on the 18th of September from Yes groups advocating and getting the cause there. We build up. I think it's a matter of balance. We've got to get the preparation. We know that we do have to answer the currency and the border. There are things that are very complicated in the currency. Some things, are so technical, you cannot persuade them on the doorstep. But you've got to at least, have a plan. You've got to have people who might say, well, I don't understand the technicalities, Dr. McNaught, but you've got to at least show that you know and you have a plan and that you've got people who are expert. And we do have, not this Jim I've got down the road from me, Jim Walker and others. So there are people there. We've got to use them. The border has to be addressed. The current SNP position on the seems to be that we don't have anything, which is why when Nicola Sturgeon passes it to Keith Brown, there is no answer at the present moment. This idea that we're going to go back into the EU, we don't have a plan between now and when we go into the EU. We know it could be 5 years, if not longer, which is why EFTA and the EEA. So those things do need to be addressed. But equally, we have moved on from 2014. I actually look back and I was participating in it. I think the correct strategy was taken in 2014. The correct strategy was that the only change that would happen in Scotland was that Holyrood would be in charge, Westminster would be out. The monarchy would remain the same as New Zealand, the same as Canada. The currency would remain in sterling because we would share the pound. We would remain in NATO. The world has changed. And I think all those things are no longer the sacrosanct position of the group in 2014. As far as I'm concerned, the Queen purring to David Cameron, this is it. Once she goes, the Alba
and not to mention Jeffrey Epstein and Savile and Prince Andrew and
is away, and I think the public are going that way as well. The currency, it's quite clear it cost us in 2014, so we have to have a position. NATO, I have to cockeye because Alba will have to take a position. But, I think, more and more, I share the view of what I think will likely be the majority view in Alba, which is we are not happy about the direction of travel. The NATO is spreading out, seeking to almost, encircle China or whatever else, that we do have to protect our neighbours. And I know that the position of the Norwegians is they don't want their safety jeopardised. I think you can ensure that you don't jeopardise Norway's safety without being part of the NATO alliance. That's something Alba will date and discuss, and I'll accept. But I think all the position that we took in 2014, that's up for change. I think we've got to get a more radical position, but also recognise the position of 2021, 2022, which is the monarchy's not in the same position as it was. It is, dying in front of us. The currency definitely needs addressed. The world is a more dangerous place. NATO, is not the organisation it was in 2014. We might not have Trump, but the direction being taken by Johnson, Biden and others is not filling me with safety that we're not heading towards some calamitous position. So as I say, that has changed and we have to change our policy with it.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think you and Neil Hanvey and other sympathetic SNP MPs can do? I mean, because in my view, it's a bloody emergency right now. I mean, we're facing, I'm in France, but in the UK and Scotland, you're facing fuel shortages, empty supermarket shelves, and it's getting bleaker and bleaker. And in my view, I mean, this type of thing, the idea that, for example, that you just say, look, we're leaving, that you as Scottish MPs vote to leave, to dissolve the union, and then you reach out to other countries, to EFTA and the other organizations to say, look, this is the situation we're in. It was imposed by Brexit, and would you recognize our legitimacy? Would you recognize that? And I think if it's well explained, again, you'll have a lot of sympathy. But I just think that, even waiting to the next year's municipal elections or council elections, that's too long, and I'm just wondering, what do you feel you can do, as MPs, again, you and Neil, of course, and other sympathetic SNP MPs to say, look, we're leaving the union. We're declaring our sovereignty, and we're going to seek international recognition and admission in different international organizations like EFTA and others. I mean, am I fantasizing and thinking that that's plausible?
Well, it is plausible if you had the right scenario, but they currently have a situation where the SNP is not going to do that. The Scottish Government under Nicola Sturgeon is not going to do that. So it's just not going to happen. So I think what you do is have to build up that pressure. And I think the first, juncture that you'll have for that will be the May elections. we should be striking now. The reason we're not is because the government, under the SNP is sitting on it. There's a good reason that we have to move now, and by that mean, we're not going to be able to move today or tomorrow. It's going to have to take, weeks, months to build up, but move we must, and there's two reasons. One is that this is our best possible opportunity. The British state has never been weaker. Yeah. The British government is a bunch of kleptomaniacs who are incompetent, as we are seeing, and that is, clearly shown with all the debacle that is Brexit. So they are weak. People are open for change because they're worried about the situation. So we have to be prepared to strike. Equally, if we don't move, then the window closes, because what will happen is the post-Brexit situation we're facing at the moment will end. The shops will get restocked, the petrol stations will fill up, we will manage to have enough drivers, either because businesses have gone to the wall or whatever. And what will happen is that the risk, at the present moment, the risk is about staying in the UK, but there'll come a situation where things will settle down. And my fear is that people will then say, well, I was for it, Kenny and Mark, and I would have gone, when Brexit, but see now things are all settled. We can't risk it. We can't go through all that again.
I totally agree with all that, but I don't know how. I honestly, this is maybe a bleak assessment, but I don't know how it gets better. And unless, at least for Scotland, that you get back in the single market as quickly as possible, and that there is a scenario that I've laid out, that I've spoken about with EFTA, and it just basically involves Scotland asserting its sovereignty and say, look, we're out of the UK. Our government is can negotiate treaties and has the powers to abide by them. If for example, in the, and I spoke specifically with EFTA about this, if in the May elections, that's considered as a plebiscitary election, would you consider accepting Scotland as a member? And they were like, yeah. Again, I think these bars that they say, oh, well, we have to do it this way or we have to do it that way. There's nothing under international law which dictates what the way in which a country achieves independence. And I think that, as long as it's well explained and as long as it's, peaceful and democratic, and again, as you correctly pointed out, the status of the UK has never been lower. I certainly take your point of, wanting to, have a constitutional convention, but how do we make that happen?
Well, I think what we've got to do is build up political power. It's not happening under the SNP because what we have is the dead hand that's, I believe, damaging the Yes movement. We're seeing it in terms of numbers not being the same. We're seeing it in a slight slippage in the vote. That's why I say we've got to ramp up and we've got to do it on all fronts. If we could do all these things tomorrow, Mark, I'd be up for it. Equally, sure. I'd like Scotland to win the World Cup. I'd like Scotland to qualify for the World Cup. The likelihood is probably not going to happen despite the victory in Austria. So we've just got to move as quickly as we can. That's why I am in Alba, because I no longer feel represented by the SNP. They are not delivering on independence. They are not delivering the radicalism that we require, and there's shameful actions being taken, such as we're seeing in terms of Calmac and shipyards on the Clyde. We just have to do what we can. Change has to come, so I think we've got to ramp it up. If we do that, then we can take it from there. Ultimately, this isn't about law or international treaties. It's about political power. If it was about international law, then I think Palestine wouldn't be suffering under the Israeli, jackboot. Catalonia wouldn't be facing some of the difficulties that it's facing. So I say this is about delivering it as speedily as we can. But we're in a situation where what we require is to ramp up the Yes movement, because we have been dining out on the 45%, the 56 MPs in 2015, and nothing has happened. And the biggest fear I always have is that hope is lost. And in the housing schemes in Scotland, who voted for us overwhelmingly, but where we had to increase the turnout, and what irritates me is this emphasis: do we have to convert yes, no's to yes? Absolutely. Equally, we've got to get the turnout out in Drumchapel and Easterhouse and Craigmillar that I was involved in from 55, 60% to 70, 75, 80%. Do that, we win. Had we had the turnout there, we'd have won that in 2014. So it's building up our movement And, sadly, the impediment to the movement at the present moment is the SNP, who are continually telling us there'll be a referendum 2020, there'll be a referendum 2021, now there'll be a referendum 23. There isn't going to be a referendum 23, which is why we've got to start building up, and that means, creating that Scottish Constitutional Convention and fighting on the fronts that you refer to, diplomatic, political, and on the street.
Yeah, and that's why I'm positing that, again, I mean, this idea that we've had of unifying the Scottish MPs to at least attempt to I mean, I know the thing is that as you know as well as I do, that the unwritten British Constitution, they just make it up as they go along. So why can't the Scottish representatives make it up as they go along and say, hey, we're the official party to the Treaty of Union. We vote to withdraw, and then therefore, we withdraw. I know it's goes back to the point. Maybe I'm being delusional in thinking that, but it just seems like a simple thing. And again, something, because there is no written constitution, the Westminster makes it up as they go along. Why can't you, as Scottish MPs, as party to
there's two things. One, you would need to ask Ian Blackford that, but two, who would accept our authority? Mm-hmm. It goes back to the point. If the Scottish MPs met, I think a Scottish Constitutional Convention had the democratic legitimacy, can move that. Mm-hmm. But 48 Scottish MPs say, do this. Mm-hmm. You might do it. But if I go to the chief executive of East Lothian and say the 48 Scottish MPs say this, I think Monica Patterson would probably say, and what do you expect me to do, Kenny?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you can tell me that, who do you think is going to accept the authority of that organisation?
Yeah, I'm just trying to sound you out on that, because
that's why I think you have to set up the Constitutional Convention. There are historic precedents. The Dáil Éireann was set up in that manner, but you have to say you're going to do it. You have to build it up. You have to get there. So that's the direction that we have to go in. And equally, as I say, the current position is, I think the SNP parliamentary group has to make its mind up about what its purpose is and what it's doing there, as opposed to filling up the green benches, taking part in, the Security and Intelligence Committee. And when I speak to my friends at Declassified UK, they snigger and laugh about it. I cannot believe, that the SNP now have a spokesperson for Northern Ireland and Wales. I mean, since when it has been the duty of the Scottish National Party, to have spokespeople for provinces that we want to support the independence from the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to turn the discussion now. I'm very happy to have spoken to you about these ideas, and we'll be developing them in our research group. But I wanted to turn to the Craig Murray situation, and I know that I believe in the your Alba conference speech, you referred to the Scottish government as becoming more authoritarian, and that's a pretty heavy word. But explain what you meant by that.
Well, they have become much more authoritarian. I think the behaviour of the Crown, I think the Crown has been compromised. It's an organisation I've always held in highest regard, but I think the behaviour of the last Lord Advocate crossed a line in terms of the Alex Salmond situation. My sources in the police, which are quite extensive, tell me that the involvement and interference, we can put it that way, by the Crown and Police Scotland has never been greater, and that is entirely unacceptable. That the First Minister is not moving quickly to separate the role of the Lord Advocate, it is entirely unacceptable that we have one person who is both the senior government advisor and the head of the prosecution service. It doesn't happen in a Western democracy. It doesn't happen in non-Western democracies. It simply isn't right.
Yeah, and this whole and I've been thinking a lot about that, and because I believe, from what I understand, there was the equalities bill that was passed. I guess when you were Justice Minister in Holyrood under Alex Salmond, and then that was modified by Nicola Sturgeon in a way that kind of targeted Alex Salmond. Do I have that right? That's what I understood.
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there, Mark.
Okay.
I think the targeting of Alex Salmond came about through people being prepared, to take action, say things or whatever, and that's why when it went before a jury of their peers, the jury of their peers clearly decided they didn't accept it, and they got, the acquittal.
Yeah. Yeah, but from what I understand, there was the and I may be I may not. I obviously I don't fully understand, but there was the modification of the policy of a policy to make it so that nobody could say anything about the accusers, and there was that this was a rule change that was made by the Sturgeon entourage. That do you know what I'm referring to?
I think where you're coming from is the anonymity. The anonymity was meant to ensure that people, who had faced serious matters and acted appropriately were given, anonymity. I had people who were supporting, the moving away from the requirement for routine corroboration, who forsook their anonymity to speak out about what they had suffered. It was never meant to be a lifetime ban for people who clearly were viewed by a jury